"Don't open that, Mom. It's just advertisements," my daughter said, and her hand was already moving toward the stack of mail on my own kitchen table before I could reach it myself. I remember pausing. Not dramatically, not like I knew what was coming. I just paused the way you do when something small strikes a wrong note, the way a single off-key sound in a familiar song makes you go still without knowing why. Glenda pulled the stack toward her side of the table, already sorting through the envelopes with practiced ease, setting the catalogs aside, slipping 2 pieces into her purse before I could see what they were. "There," she said, smiling over her coffee cup. "Nothing worth your time." She'd been visiting more often lately, 3 times in the past month, which was more than the previous year combined. Always with a reason: dropping off food, checking the furnace, helping me organize the guest room after I'd mentioned the shelving had come loose. Always helpful. Always busy near my desk or my filing cabinet, or twice now, my laptop. I'd told myself it was grief, that losing her father 2 years ago had made her want to be closer to me. I'd wanted to believe that. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a school librarian. I know how to read between the lines. My late husband, Ray, had been a careful man, careful with money, careful with documents, careful with trust. When he died, I inherited not just his love of order, but also the weight of managing everything alone. I'd done it. Badly at first, then steadier. Updated the accounts, revised the will, sat across from our attorney and signed paper after paper. During a difficult stretch last January, a week of bronchitis that deepened into pneumonia, I'd let my son-in-law Todd handle a few small things he'd offered, and I'd been too exhausted to argue. He paid 2 bills online, said he needed my account login just for the one time, and I gave it to him, because he was my daughter's husband and I was running a fever of 101. He'd sat at my desk for longer than 2 bills should have taken. When he finished, he closed the laptop himself, rather than leaving it open the way I always did. I thought about that now, as I watched Glenda's car disappear around the corner. I went to my desk. I opened my laptop. My main bank's website loaded easily. Everything looked normal at a glance, but something Ray always said came back to me. Look at what's not there, not just what is. I scrolled through the recent activity carefully. The balance was lower than I'd calculated in my head. Not by a dramatic amount, enough to be a question mark, not enough to jump out on a Tuesday morning. I called the bank's customer service line. The woman who answered had a measured professional voice. She verified my identity, went quiet for a moment, then transferred me to the branch manager without explaining why. The branch manager, a woman named Kay, said she'd like me to come in the following morning. She said it carefully, the way people do when they've already seen something troubling and don't want to say it over the phone. I slept 4 hours that night. In the morning, I dressed in the gray blazer I'd worn to Ray's memorial service, which was the most serious thing I owned, and I drove myself to the bank. Kay closed her office door and turned her monitor so I could see it. 8 months ago, she said, a secondary checking account was opened in your name. It required your social security number, your date of birth, and a copy of your ID. I looked at the screen. The account had my name and an address I didn't recognize, a P.O. box in the next town over. Small transfers out of my primary account, 200 here, 300 there, 17 of them across 8 months. Nothing large enough to trigger an automatic alert, nothing small enough to look like rounding errors. Careful, deliberate. The access came from a device on record as having logged into your primary account last January, Kay said. She didn't say anything more than that. She didn't have to. I put my hands flat on my knees under the table and kept my face even. Is there anything else? I asked. She set a second sheet in front of me. My retirement account, the one Ray and I had opened together 30 years ago, had a beneficiary change on file submitted 11 months ago. The new primary beneficiary was listed as Todd. I had never signed that form. I thanked Kay for her time, asked her to freeze the fraudulent account and start the process of restoring my primary account's security, and walked out into the pale November morning with my car keys in one hand and a folder of documentation in the other. I sat in the parking lot for 12 minutes. I counted the minutes on the dashboard clock because that was easier than thinking. Then I called my attorney. He had been handling my affairs since before Ray died. When I laid out what I'd found, he said, We needed to move on 3 fronts immediately. Revoke any access Todd had been given in connection with my accounts, file a fraud report with the bank and with the police, and contest the beneficiary change on the retirement account. He said that last one was critical and time-sensitive. Did he ever have a signed authorization from you for anything financial? He asked. I gave him a verbal okay to pay 2 bills online, I said. Last January, when I had pneumonia. Did you give him your login? I closed my eyes, yes. That's going to be part of the report, but it doesn't change what he did. Using someone's credentials to open a fraudulent account and redirect funds is a crime, regardless of how he obtained access. We met in his office that afternoon. I signed forms. I initialed pages. Each stroke of the pen felt like closing a door I should have bolted years ago. From there, I drove to the police station. The officer who took my statement was young, with a careful manner and a pen that moved quickly. When I finished, he said, "Do you know if he still has access to any of your accounts or devices?" "No," I said. "I changed everything this morning." He nodded. "We'll be in contact." That evening, my phone rang 9 times. Glenda's name appeared 5 times, Todd's number twice. 2 more calls from a number I didn't recognize. I made soup. I sat at the same kitchen table where my daughter had reached for my mail, and I ate slowly, watching the streetlight come on outside the window. They arrived together on Thursday afternoon, 2 days after I'd filed the report. I heard the car in the driveway and saw them both through the curtain. Glenda, in the coat I'd bought her for Christmas. Todd in the jacket he wore to every family occasion. Both of them moving toward my porch with the coordinated momentum of people who have agreed in advance on what they're going to say. I opened the front door, but not the storm door. Todd spoke first, his voice pitched low and reasonable, the way it always was when he wanted something. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said he'd been trying to help me manage things without burdening me. He said the account was meant to be a gift, a way to set money aside without me worrying about it. He said the beneficiary form must have been a clerical error, that he hadn't realized what box he'd checked, that any mistake could be corrected in 5 minutes if I'd just sit down with them and talk. "Mom," Glenda said, "he was trying to help you." I looked at my daughter, then at the man standing beside her, then back at my daughter. "The account statements," I said, "were being mailed to a P.O. box neither of you mentioned to me. The transfers have been running for 8 months. The beneficiary change was made on my retirement account without my signature." I paused. "Which part of that is the misunderstanding?" Todd's jaw tightened. "You're making this into something it isn't." "I filed a police report," I said, "so they can decide what it is." The color left Glenda's face. Todd took a half-step forward, and something in his expression shifted. The reasonable veneer went thin, like a coat of paint that hasn't dried properly. "You went to the police," he said, "and it came out flat." I did. Over a clerical error. Over 17 transfers and a retirement account I didn't know had been changed. I kept my voice the same way I used to keep it when a parent came in angry about a child's overdue books. Steady, because steadiness unnerves people who came prepared for a fight. "I think we're finished for today." I closed the door. I stood with my hand on the knob and listened to their footsteps on the porch. The muffled exchange of voices I couldn't quite make out, the car doors, the engine. When the sound faded, I went to the kitchen and started the kettle. Glenda came back alone on Saturday morning. She stood on my porch in the same coat, but this time her hands were empty and her face carried none of the rehearsed confidence of 2 days before. She looked tired. She looked like my daughter. I opened the storm door. "I didn't know about the retirement account," she said. "I want you to believe that." "But you knew about the mail." She looked down at the porch boards. "He said the statements would confuse you, that it was easier to keep things tidy." "Tidy," I repeated. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you let your husband decide what your mother should and shouldn't see in her own home." I watched her face. "Your father never would have done that, and neither should you." She started to cry, and I watched her cry with a feeling I can only describe as very old and very tired. I have loved this person since before she drew her first breath, and she had stood in my kitchen and taken my mail because her husband asked her to. "I can't invite you in today," I said. "Not yet." The police came to the house. I know. We have the kids, Mom. If this goes further, then he should have thought about the kids before he opened an account in my name. I kept my voice quiet. I love you, but I'm not the one who has to make this right. He is. She left. I stood in the entryway for a moment, then walked back to the kitchen and finished my tea. The phone campaign started the following week. My sister-in-law called, voice careful, saying she'd heard I was going through something difficult, and that family ought to work things out privately. Ray's cousin, David, called to remind me that children makes mistakes, but they're still family. A woman from my former book club, someone I'd always considered an acquaintance more than a friend, left a voicemail, saying Todd had stopped by her house and seemed genuinely remorseful, and didn't. I think I was being a little hasty. I didn't call any of them back. Todd had always been good at charm. He'd been using it on me for 11 years. My neighbor Nell appeared on my porch the following Sunday with a loaf of banana bread and the good sense not to pretend nothing had happened. We sat at the kitchen table, same chairs, different air in the room, and she listened while I told her everything. He picked his moment carefully, she said when I finished. After Ray died and before I could get my footing. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Ray would have spotted it sooner. Maybe. But Ray isn't here, which is exactly why they tried. She didn't argue with that. She stayed 2 hours and didn't ask me a single question that required me to justify myself. That, I've learned, is the particular gift of a good neighbor. They don't make you explain why you deserve to be believed. Tori called from Portland a few days later. She's 23, studying environmental law, the kind of young woman who sends handwritten birthday cards and calls her grandmother on ordinary Tuesdays for no reason except to talk. She's my son's daughter from his first marriage, which puts her at a comfortable distance from Glenda's branch of the family. Close enough to love us all, far enough to see us clearly. Dad told me some of it, she said. Are you okay? Actually okay? Actually okay, said. Yes. I've been worried about you for a long time, she said. Not because of this specifically, just the way they talked about you. Like you were something to be managed. That landed somewhere deep and stayed there. It was the first time anyone had named what I'd been feeling for years, but hadn't found the language for. You should have said it sooner, I told her. I know, she said. I'm saying it now, and if you need anything, you call me. December came gray and cold. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly and with a great deal of paper. Todd was formally charged. His attorney made contact with mine, offering restitution and requesting that I consider dropping the charges. I considered the request in the same way I'd considered the 17 transfers, carefully, thoroughly, and without sentiment. I did not drop the charges. I spent Christmas Eve with Nell and her sister, who'd come down from Vermont. We made a pot of chili and watched old movies and went to bed before midnight. On Christmas morning, Tori called at 8 o'clock and we talked for an hour about her coursework, about the book I'd been reading, about the way the light looked on the snow in the yard. She asked if she could come visit in the spring. I said yes, please. Come and stay as long as you like. January passed. I relearned the rhythm of my finances the way Ray had kept them, documented, reviewed monthly, nothing left to anyone else's discretion. My attorney helped me establish a living trust that moved my major assets beyond the reach of anything a signature on a bad day could undo. I added security verification to every account. I shredded every document with any personal information before it went into the recycling. Small habits. But they were mine, and they were enough. The restitution from the bank's fraud recovery process came through in February. The beneficiary designation on the retirement account was corrected, and I named Tori in its place, with my son as secondary. I revised the will with language my attorney called unambiguous, which felt like exactly the right word for what I needed. Glenda and I spoke once more before winter ended, a short phone call where she said she understood, more or less, and I said I hoped she did, more or less. We didn't make plans. We didn't make promises. We left things where they were, which was not closed, but not open the way they'd been before. Some doors, once you've seen what's behind them, don't hang quite the same way again. I was at peace with that. I'd had 2 years of grief and a year of quiet suspicion, and this, the clarity of knowing exactly where I stood, felt cleaner than anything I'd experienced in a long while. By March, the snow that had buried the yard since November was finally pulling back from the edges, retreating toward the shaded places under the hedgerow where it always lasted longest. I opened the kitchen window for the first time in months and stood listening to water drip from the eaves. The air came in cool and green and possible. Tori arrived in April, just as the lilacs were coming in. We sat on the back porch in thin spring sunlight, her with tea and me with coffee, talking about nothing urgent, which is the best kind of talking. She asked about my roses, and I asked about her classes, and at some point she reached over and put her hand over mine, and I looked at her. 23 years old, her whole life still stretching ahead of her, her father's steadiness already settled in her face, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief, exactly. Something older than that. Recognition. The acknowledgement that this quiet porch, this cup of coffee, this person who called on ordinary Tuesdays, was real and solid and entirely uncomplicated mine. The things that had been taken were being returned, piece by piece, through the slow machinery of the law. The things that couldn't be taken were already home. If you've read this far, maybe you've had your own version of a hand reaching across the table for something that wasn't theirs to touch. Maybe you've explained it away. They were stressed. They meant well. It wasn't worth the disruption. Maybe you've handed someone your login just this once because you were sick and tired and you trusted them with the last of the energy you had. I'm telling you this. Trust your stillness. Trust the moment when something small strikes a wrong note and the room goes quiet inside you. That quiet is not weakness. That quiet is information. You are allowed to open your own mail. You are allowed to ask the questions that frighten you. You are allowed to walk into the bank in your best blazer and say, I need to know what's been done in my name, and stay in your chair until you have the answer. The door is yours. The key belongs to you. And nobody, not a husband, not a child, not anyone who has ever called you family, gets to reach across your own table and decide what you should and shouldn't see. Protect yourself. You don't need permission.